A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Before that, we'll update this week's political agenda with the Australian Christian Lobby, and, of course, perhaps top of the agenda might be a change of government in the state of Queensland. Well, Michelle Pearce, the National CEO of the ACL, is joining us in just a moment. Then we're 90 minutes away from exploring the findings of a new report released today exposing the sexual harassment of teachers. Now, it's no wonder many teachers are contemplating leaving the teaching profession. We're going to check in with Melinda Tankard-Reist from Collective Shout about their report and their recommendations. Then on Faith and the Future with Dr. Camille Majdali, our series is on a great salvation, and today we're talking about getting deliverance from the sinful nature. Yeah, it'll be a compelling set of conversations ahead, engaging ones on this Monday edition of 2020. On a Monday, we like to check in with the Australian Christian Lobby. Michelle Pearce is CEO of the ACL. Michelle's joining us. Hey, Michelle, welcome back to 2020.
Hi, Neil. Great to be here again with you and the listeners.
Well, Michelle, David Crisafulli is going to be sworn in today as Queensland's new Premier. I wonder if you've got an overall reflection on the Queensland election outcome from the weekend.
Yes, well, we see the numbers quickly added up to give LNP the 48 seats that they needed. Looks like the Greens will lose a seat. The Katter Party, which are the party that's introducing a lot of good legislation, particularly on pro-life issues, currently have 3 seats. So it's interesting when you look nationally. We just had the ACT election a couple of weeks ago, and also in the Northern Territory. But particularly in ACT and Queensland, we've seen the Greens vote go backwards.
And for some, that will be a major point of celebration. Hey, you know, when we talk about Greens vote going backwards, I noted that the outfit Family First, they actually polled 1.7%, which is not a bad showing. They weren't expecting to win a seat, but I think that sort of marks a bit of a comeback, doesn't it, for a party that's got a Judeo-Christian foundation?
Absolutely. And you would see them as kind of the counterparty to the Greens, very opposite in terms of the kinds of policies they promote. And in just reflecting upon the Greens, I think that Boomers and Gen X in particular have grown up seeing Greens as the environmental party. Millennials, I'm a millennial, and you know, I think people around my age have grown up with that view as well, but kind of suspicious of the Greens' extreme behaviour. But I think this next generation, Gen Z, believe that, you know, they see them as the extremist party. They're seeing the Greens and their behaviour and their policies as quite extreme, that they would compromise the well-being of actual human people with irrational policies that will protect the environment. So I think that people, you know, especially the younger people, are seeing the environmental issues as a lot more complex than that, and don't want to risk their own cost of living and so forth by voting for Greens.
You know, Michelle, from what I understand, there's now a significant number of Christians in the new Queensland Parliament, in the government. Notably, of course, some listeners will be aware that Amanda Stoker, the former senator, has now been elected the member for Oodgeroo on the south side of Brisbane. She has a out there strong Christian faith. But Michelle, the fact that there might be extra Christians in the Queensland Parliament and in the government, is that likely to make any difference, do you think?
It's great news because we know that these people, they'll have a voice in the party room. Hopefully they'll guide the party against making decisions, particularly that threaten religious freedoms. We know that before the election, we were pushing for the LNP to commit to amending the Anti-Discrimination Act, where the Respect at Work bill, which Queenslanders are familiar with, really compromised Christian institutions and Christian churches. So we believe that the door is open to be able to have these discussions with the LNP to repeal some of those changes that were made, that, you know, it really puts Christians, even in the workplace, under threat. You know, if they could be causing an offence or attracting a civil penalty if they misgender someone or speak about a Christian view of sexuality or refuse to wear a rainbow lanyard or something like that. So anything that could potentially offend somebody from the LGBTQ community within the workplace could attract a penalty. And so this needs to be repealed and the Anti-Discrimination Act to return to what it previously was. So we hope that these Christians in the party, good people that can see this obvious religious discrimination, would be able to amend things like this.
An important word that I've been talking about now for weeks or months in the lead up to this election is the idea of repeal, because the agenda of the former ALP government, they've been on steroids throughout 2024, just moving all sorts of very extreme policies into the Queensland Parliament. I wonder have you got any insight so far as what this new government might mean for Queensland? Has the LNP made any commitments so far as the ACL is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, not 100% commitments that they will do so and so, but they've committed that they will talk to us about an exit strategies bill for women or for people in prostitution. So Queensland has the least restraints on the sex industry in the whole nation, and it's very intriguing and quite shocking, really, that Labor pushed through this legislation when you already have such a high rate of crime in Queensland. So prostitution in Queensland is treated as any other legitimate industry, which means more exploitation of women, because where there's no restrictions, demand will increase. Where demand increases, then you need more women, and more women that are really trafficked to service this demand. And so the LNP needs to address the exploitation of women. They also need to review the gender affirmation practices. It's fraught in Queensland health. It's everywhere. We know Dr. Gillian Spencer, who famously has spoken out against the affirmation approach within Queensland Care. So Queensland's one of those places that, you know, you've got the highest abortion rate, you've got gender affirmation not only within the healthcare but taught in schools as well, and so many children are being harmed through this ideology that Queensland absolutely has to have a review. So good Christians in the party that understand the harm to children and unborn children, who understand religious discrimination, we're hoping that will help to give ACL access to be able to give practical suggestions about how these things can be amended and looked into and changed.
Let me ask you about the abortion issue, because it's the Katters Party that were really, I guess, responsible for highlighting the fact that there were some differences and wanting to bring the abortion issue to the fore, and they successfully did so. And of course, with the new Premier, David Crisafulli, backtracking and ducking and weaving and not wanting to be committal on areas around this issue of abortion. But do you think there might be some light at the end of a tunnel, that there might be some movement around the issue here in Queensland?
Yeah, I mean, it was really sad to see David Crisafulli just give in to the politics of this issue, trying to appeal to perhaps those who are branding this issue as a women's rights issue. It's not. We are talking about late-term abortion, those babies that, if they were delivered, would be alive. They're viable for life. And I really believe that the majority of Australians don't agree that babies, healthy babies particularly, should be aborted at a stage where they're viable for life outside the womb. And when Stephen Miles was Premier, he assured that the late-term abortion rate wouldn't increase, but it has more than doubled. The latest figures we have are in 2021, where 304 babies were aborted late-term. So we really hope, and we even prayed this morning with our team, that the MPs will remain the ability to have a conscience vote on this issue. So traditionally, MPs are allowed to have a conscience vote on life issues. So we hope and pray that that's retained, that David Crisafulli doesn't demand his party vote a certain way on this. And you mentioned the Katter Party, and yes, Robbie Katter has committed to introduce a private members bill that does deal with this issue of late-term abortion. So he's a hero. He's not doing this because it's politically popular. He hasn't got any votes to win on this issue from his region, but he's just doing it because he's compassionate, because he heard the testimony of people like Louise Adsett, who talk about babies that survive abortions and are left to die. And so we hope that there will be enough numbers in the House. You don't have to be pro-life to support a bill such as this. You just have to have a bit of compassion and just believe that babies should not be aborted when they're viable for life outside the womb.
You probably watched the speeches on Saturday night, and there was a lot of criticism of the former Premier Stephen Miles being very ungracious and not conceding defeat at the time that he made his speech. I can't help but note that there was a common theme in his speech to what Dan Andrews had in Victoria at the last Victorian election, where he was very proud of implementing his progressive agenda, which is really it's code for our sort of socialist agenda that's being implemented. And if we went through all of those sorts of issues, and you've mentioned some of those in the prostitution issues, but we could add to that the drug decriminalisation that's happened in Queensland, the threats to freedom for faith-based schools, issues around gender ideology and birth certificates, and the babies born alive issue, the religious freedom and the Respect at Work bill, as well as all sorts of other issues around parental rights. There's a big, long list. And so when we think of a new government like this and the possibility of repeal, there's a lot of things to work with, aren't there, as leader of the Christian lobby?
Absolutely, you've listed it well there, and this isn't just the battle we're facing in Queensland. This is all over the nation, and federally as well. And so, we're really looking strategically. What do we target first? What has the greatest possibility of winning? Who are the people in the House? And so, with new people, with a new government, we'll be reworking our strategy to really aim for those things that are possible to change, and it's asserting the value of the Christian vote as well, which is really, really important. We see this move away from the left in the ACT, in the Northern Territory and Queensland. Queensland should learn from that. The LNP needs to notice that there is a shift towards more conservative values, that people are sick of the left and the way that it's enforcing their ideology in the workplaces and within schools, how it's affecting their children. And I think that the LNP are misreading if they are believing that it's because they're becoming more progressive that they're attracting these votes, whereas I think it's exactly the opposite. They're sick of an extreme left government, and they want to see a reasonable government address the tangible issues within their communities.
And interesting, isn't it, that while a lot of people think if you're a Christian, you're favouring an LNP over an ALP, but there's no guarantee, is there at all, that the LNP will do anything different to what the ALP has done? And if they don't have any sort of repeal agenda, doesn't that actually put them in just as bad a place as the ALP?
Yes, exactly. Silence in the face of evil is evil itself. And even if the government doesn't progress any bad agendas, but doesn't do anything about the current laws in the state, then it's just as bad as progressing, an evil agenda. And so I think it's their moral responsibility and a responsibility to their voters to repeal the damage that Labor has done.
A little while back, and I'm just talking really recent history over the last few years, we all thought a lot of these big moral issues were some things that the federal government dealt with. And then all of the state governments began to legislate all of these things in their own right and without any sort of recourse that could have happened from the federal government. Let's just pick up on one issue here for a moment, because the abortion debate has been really there in the headlines. And talking about that abortion issue, and people will say, and quite rightly in Australia, that's a state issue. But I can't help but think that Jacinta Price, who's a coalition MP, reportedly making some comments about abortion, that the federal coalition should have a debate about abortion access, declaring pregnancies ended after the first trimester were immoral and saying late-stage abortions were akin to infanticide. I wonder if you've got any thoughts about what happens federally now, given the next big election's likely to be a federal election. Any thoughts around these sorts of issues back into the federal sphere?
Yeah, we need to define life for what it is. The criminal code has penalties for murder. And that so if we define a child within the womb, especially a child who is viable outside of the womb, perhaps a child who has a heartbeat as a living being, as a human being, then yes, we do need to, of course we need to relook at the laws, and if it happens federally, then that will cover all states. That would be a quick way to wind back the atrocity and inhumanity of late-term abortions. And I just really congratulate and celebrate Jacinta Price for her bold comments. And she's a woman, and she's an Indigenous woman, and she's not a professing Christian. She has a lot of favour within the coalition, and she's seen as somebody who's reasonable in the Voice debate when they're talking about the referendum. She came forward with very sound arguments, and I just hope when people hear this that they'll see that she's actually speaking from a position of reason, a position of common sense, but also a position of compassion. But when we have the media twist and contort this issue, and they're saying, oh, this is about women's rights, the Australian Christian lobby are trying to ban abortions all over the nation. Of course, we value every life in the womb, but we know that our culture doesn't see all life as sacred. But we do believe that the majority of people are against late-term abortion of healthy babies where the life poses no risk to the mother. And so we need to stir the consciousness of Australians and speak compassion into this issue. And I'm just grateful that Jacinta Price has said so. And perhaps that's something that we'll see a coalition government address, God willing.
Perhaps she will make something prominent of that word infanticide, because sometimes we think of that word and that's usually about taking the life of the child after the child has been already born. But when you're talking about viable babies in the womb, and of course South Australia just a week or so ago by one vote missed the opportunity to have those babies born and adopted. But this word infanticide, do you think that's actually likely to be something more prominent in the national debate?
I think it's a word we should continue to use because it is the reality of the situation. When you hear the arguments about babies born alive, we say that babies born alive should be given protection. It's a real living human being. But then the argument is, oh, well, the sign of life is just a twitching of a limb. Or, when you just think, okay, babies are aborted twitching. Outside of the womb, breath there, whether they're even the word viability, even if they're viable, they feel pain. It is infanticide to let these babies die, and it is infanticide to kill these babies in the womb. There's an active move an active act to rip these babies apart limb by limb, to inject their hearts with potassium chloride to cause the death of that baby. Even abortion is a word that can be not really dealing with the reality of what it is. It's killing the baby inside the womb, and those that are born outside, who have been delivered and are still twitching, to leave them to die is infanticide.
Michelle, running short of time, the ACL, a federal election on its way early next year. Is there a direction you're able to let listeners in on? Is there priorities that you'll be focusing on? What should listeners be thinking the ACL is going into bat on what issues? What's coming?
In every state, there are major attacks on religious freedom. But what we're seeing is it's not only religious freedom that is under attack, it's just basic freedom of expression, freedom of speech. And we're seeing issues like the misinformation bill. There's another one called the privacy bill, which sounds harmless, but that also limits freedom of speech. And so our aim over the election is to really educate the Christian community as to how freedom is under threat in this nation, and to put these to the major parties and ask for commitments around the protection of the religious communities, but also protections around freedom of expression. We are supposed to abide by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which include freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and so forth. But time and time again, states are passing legislation, even at the federal level, bills are being passed that actually inhibit our freedoms and really could put things like the symbol of the cross prohibited, our ability to speak in public about a biblical sexual ethic, threatened to put us into prison. These are real laws that are being put forward within our states and federal government, and the Christian community needs to know about them and needs to pressure our government to ensure that our religious freedoms are protected.
Well, the ACL goes on being a resource that can be used by Christians to understand what the agenda is all about. And I'll encourage listeners to visit the ACL website. While they're there, this new documentary you have just released or about to, it's called The Truth Behind the Gender Agenda. Give us a little insight into how valuable that might be in communities all around the nation.
Sure. We've released a second episode. The main title is called The Truth Revealed, and these episodes are called The Gender Experiment. And they really reveal the evidence that Australian parents are being pressured to support their child's gender transition. And we have a mother of a transitioner, Judith Hunter, who explains how social pressures and school protocols, which were shaped by this gender affirmation only approach, isolated her daughter from her. Their relationship has broken down. And Dr. Gillian Spencer is on there, and she shares about a case where Queensland parents have had their child removed by child services for not going ahead with their child's transition or not supporting it. And we have testimonies from detransitioners on this documentary as well. The most powerful quote, I think, in the whole documentary is an Australian detransitioner, Courtney Colson, and she says, when in relation to going to the doctors, she said, I went there asking for help and they gave me mutilation. And that's the reality that many of our young people are facing. Got Senator Alex Antic on the documentary, who says that the left love to get their hands on kids early because they're easier to shape. So some really powerful comments in there, and we really hope that the release of this documentary will continue to mount the pressure to protect children from these life-altering medical treatments, and that it will lead to a state inquiry, because we only need one state to expose it, better yet, a federal inquiry that will look into the whole nation. So that's what this documentary is about. I encourage people to go to the website, to go to any of our social media platforms to view it.
Okay, and so to go and access that good resource, acl.org.au, that's the website of the Australian Christian Lobby. Lots of resources there and updates as to how these issues are being played out in our state and in our federal sphere of debate. Michelle Pearce is the CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby. Michelle, thank you so much for updating these issues with listeners today on 2020.
Thanks for giving me the time, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.